Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok.
I'm not dogmatic about the method. You have to do it like this or like that. For me, it's really to connect whatever the user is seeing and doing to what you are doing to enable the user to do this.
On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of. Welcome back, folks. On this episode, we are joined by Christoph Steinlehner. Christoph started his career as a web designer and developer before moving into product management and product leadership roles. He sharpened his product leadership skills at organizations like the World Bank, Airbus, Art+Com, who do phenomenal interactive kinetic work, the German unicorn Taxfix, and the list goes on. Christoph then found his calling in product coaching and specializes in the area of visualization to enable product teams to communicate and collaborate better. He has even developed a mapper method, which we get to hear a lot about, and that he's made generously available to you, our listeners. I really enjoyed nerding out with Christoph on the effective use of user journeys and especially the tool Service Blueprint. It's a super important communication and collaboration tool, and I continue to be surprised that not all product teams are using service blueprints. Something that I found particularly insightful about Christoph's advice on the benefits of sharing rough and unfinished sketches goes well beyond the typical efficiency and flexibility. So we get to hear about that and other advice from Christoph about visualization and product mapping on this episode. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Christoph, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ashok. It's amazing to be here and to talk about everything about the product management mess and how to get out of this.
Why don't we start with your opinion on where do you see the mess or the pain or the importance of visualization in the product realm?
One story where I developed like the first parts of my method were when I was with an educational publisher and they wanted to change their business model. The idea was that it's pretty easy to make all the technical changes, to go through what's needed, to have bundled products and have a subscription model, like the first steps to a subscription model. But when I went in there, I moved from team to team, and it was pretty unclear because I ended up every meeting with, okay, I have more questions than I had before, and at more loose ends, and it was like quite confusing at this time, and I struggled a lot with like how to get out of this. So because I have a design background, I did like my note taking in a visual style. So I mapped out the customer journey and added what I heard, like what systems are involved, what teams are involved, what processes are involved at each step the customer is taking. But I just it was for myself. It was my note taking, and I didn't share it in the beginning. And at some point I shared it, and it was a game changer because people started to point out things I haven't seen before. They changed like my perspective on things because I was, of course, not aware of everything, and they just could point at things and say, okay, let's talk to these people, or let's correct this because you have a wrong impression here. And with that, we really aligned around a shared picture, a shared language, without going down this endless rabbit holes in our conversations.
I love that. I think it might be an Einstein quote. It's something as simple as, if I can't picture it, I can't understand it. And it sounds like that started out as something you were doing for yourself in this really complex product organization. And then good for you that you're a designer. So how you presented it visually might have been better than the chicken scratch that I do. And what I really like is that there's only so much you can convey in a picture. And so you don't necessarily get drawn into the weeds, but at the same time, everyone's looking at the same picture when you have something to visualize. And I'm curious to know if you could get into some of the before and after of when you presented that image of what that was like for the product teams before, and then what that turned into after they got to see the visualization.
Yeah. First of all, so I myself, even if I'm a designer, I can't draw, and I'm like not the person who does like really fancy, nice visualizations. In the end, it's Post-its. It's like sticky notes next to each other, which are just giving a shared understanding. There is no need to be like the visual mastermind. So the change for the teams was that they could have a shared understanding of something. Because in product teams, we have a lot of different perspectives. We come from a business perspective, we come from a design and user perspective, come from a technical perspective. And oftentimes, like, these people are speaking different languages, having different mental models in their head. And as soon as they get this out, they see like how their counterparts are thinking. What is their mental model? And then can align on a shared one. So, for example, I often work with service blueprints, which align around the customer journey and then add what technical systems are needed, what teams are needed, what processes are involved, and all things like that, even adding user data, adding insights we generated along the way. And with that, everybody can look at this and can see like, okay, that's where I understand most of it. I can add to this picture and we can discuss this shared artifact.
So you mentioned sticky notes there, and I think there's certainly ways in which folks can try and jam too much in there. And I love that sticky notes only allow you to put so much information, and that simplicity with some level of accuracy will give us all the same metaphor. What are some other ways that you think are best practices or ways that folks maybe get it wrong when they try to visualize stuff that you're coaching them into?
Yeah. So one main thing, and that's why I say sticky notes and why I say be scrappy, is to overshoot. So to try to make a thing out of the visualization, to make it pretty, to make it like a good way to present. It's not about the presentation, it's about the discussion around it. So really keeping it scrappy, keeping it changeable is a key aspect. Because with that, people approach it also differently. So imagine if you walk into a room and there is this nice map and everything is like, looks done. Nobody will challenge this. Nobody will walk into this room and be like, that's an error and I understand that differently and so on and so on. It looks like somebody spent a long time figuring this out. So A, it's probably right. And B, who am I to now challenge this person? They probably spend a lot of time on it. Better not disturb that. So when I walk into with a first idea of a map, I keep it really open, and maybe I'm put some question marks in between where I'm not sure what's happening there, or I put like several versions of something where we can discuss what's the right version. So either if it's an as-is state where we often begin, or if it's a to-be state where we're imagining how the future is, we can then discuss multiple versions. So it's not about presenting, it's about a tool to have a better conversation and have a better collaboration.
I love that. If we think of the original goals or the intent of why we're doing the extra work to visualize, I'm making some assumptions here. It's on aligning your team on the context. It's on a very important one you just brought up around soliciting feedback, input, clarification. and then it's on maybe prioritizing a plan in terms of what are we going to do next. And we want a minimum effective dose of precision or polish on our visualization, where it's helping us make those better decisions and clarify and solicit more feedback. And so anything beyond that is probably wasteful. And I love that maybe paring it down from even the minimum effective dose is a psychological trick maybe to actually get people more engaged and involved and wanting to help versus assuming that everything's set in play. And there's still a number of teams that are collaborating remotely, right? Even as folks start to go back into the office here. And what are some tools or even techniques? Because naturally, things are going to seem a little bit more scrappy if we're at a whiteboard or if I'm on the back of a napkin versus if I got to put something online, there's some level of implicit polish. And at the same time, we want to give the same level of collaboration that it's similar to if you and I were standing at a whiteboard trying to convey some information. So what do you think about the online collaboration side of things of visualization?
Yeah, I use usually virtual whiteboards. So things like Miro, Mural, FigJam, I think most companies already are familiar with the things. There's also, I think, a Microsoft version of it. There's an Apple version of it. So use whatever is a freeform tool. I think that's quite important that you have like just endless space. You can put things in there however you like to not get limited by some tool which is taking away your freedom in the beginning. It might help you then to move into other tools later on, but begin at something which is free form, like an endless virtual canvas. And these tools also allow you to collaborate. So you can work on these together. And the nice thing why I now, even sometimes in office settings, prefer a virtual whiteboard is that it stays there, it can evolve, you can like drag it around, present it, and so on and so on. Because that's a little bit like, I love the hardware stickies. I love like working on a wall, but it's tricky to transport that. It's tricky to like then take pictures of it and work further with it. So virtual whiteboards are a big win for me.
Yeah, I feel like we're likely around the corner of one of those apps allowing us to upload a picture and turning it into something a little bit more dynamic and updatable versus the static image. And I'm curious, so starting out scrappy, when especially in the early days of an idea, whatever size of granularity that idea is, we talked about the benefits of showing that vulnerability and soliciting feedback. Once you get to kind of a place where you're ready and feeling good about the level of inputs that have gone in and you want to transition to making a plan, what happens to either the virtual whiteboard or the whiteboard stickers there, and what do you ideally like to do in order to continue getting the benefits of the visualization?
Yeah, so me personally, I emphasize people to really do like the next action. So don't get stuck into the visual part of it, but define your next actions and then move also into your other artifacts. So it might be for bigger things, road mapping, but oftentimes it's like planning just your next action. What information don't you have yet? Where do you have to talk to customers? Where do you have maybe do a technical investigation? Where do you have maybe model something in your business? Things like that. And don't put now the visual thing as a holy grail in the middle of yourself, but just like move on and probably also throw it away at some point. Because half of the magic lies in the creation and in the discussion of the creation. If you have a piece which is already stale for a year, probably nobody remembers what the mindset was around that, what were your discussions. So these are the notes of your discussions. It's not the documentation of anything. It's not something you take out 3 years in the future and we'll look at it and it will be totally clear what you discussed.
That makes a ton of sense. It's nice to have that as an artifact in case we want to go back in time and remember why we made a decision. But forcing yourself to stick to a plan there versus rethinking it is definitely always a risk. Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product design or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show. Something I'm really interested in about your work is the work that you do around service blueprints. At Integral, it's oftentimes a tool that we have introduced to our customers. Folks have a customer journey, maybe not. But a service blueprint is something that tends to be fairly novel. We require a little bit of convincing of folks to do that next level of it. So maybe, let's go into the basics a little bit before we get into the deeper details. Why don't you tell us about a customer journey and a service blueprint first?
Yeah, of course. So I love that you use service blueprints because for me, it's one of the approaches where you really can connect what your customer is doing and seeing to what your business is doing. So a service blueprint is based on a customer journey. So on top, you have like all the steps a customer is going through in interacting with your business. This could be often a digital interface, but could be also a shop, could be also a customer service rep, could be a mail they're writing, and so on and so on. It doesn't matter which interface more or less they're using with your business. And then below this backbone of your customer journey, you start to add the systems you're using, the teams are involved in that, your processes, maybe regulations, maybe also data points you collected. I use it pretty flexible. I'm not dogmatic about the method. You have to do it like this or like that. For me, it's really to connect whatever the user is seeing and doing to what you are doing to enable the user to do this. And with that, we have exactly this cross-functionality of our teams represented in the customer journey. Because oftentimes some back-end process is really disconnected from what it means for our customers. But visualizing this in a service blueprint, we can directly look at one glimpse. Okay, here like the customer is paying and here these payment systems are involved, for example.
Mm-hmm. So let's try and create an example here. I'm throwing a party at my house soon, and we'll make something pretty relatable and that we can bring back into product development, right? So what I heard from you is you got to start with the customer journey, right? So let's talk me through if you were helping me host this party and you say, hey, we got to do a customer journey. What are some best practices and stuff, and what do we end up with?
So what's like the final goal of your customer, of probably your friend you're inviting to your party? What's like the end state?
We want to have folks connect with each other. I want them to celebrate an event with myself and really have maybe call it a bookend to the summer and fall season before the winter comes around.
Cool. So everybody gets home with like some like new great story to tell about their friends in this party. That would be the last step. And then we go on to the first step and say like, okay, what's the first thing which needs to happen that everybody can have this great time?
Probably an invitation, right?
Okay.
That they got to know
Then
about the party.
the invitation is then probably the first step, but then you map out all the steps in between. So you start with your invitation and you then go through like, okay, probably there's maybe already something before the invitation. You have to write it, you have to define how to send it, and so on and so on. And then you plan your party, you have to organize the food, you have to organize drinks, maybe you have a party game, maybe you have some entertainment going on, maybe you need to get a barbecue from a friend, something like that. And you map out the steps which are going through this experience and then add from the perspective of your guests. And then you can add like, okay, I need barbecue, I need to get the drinks. For the drinks, I need to use this online order service and so on and so on. So you build out this map and you get like an overview where you can then see, okay, what's needed. Also, maybe you outsource something. You ask your wife to get like the groceries, or you have a friend who is like amazing at invitation writing and you ask them to help you with like a nice handwritten invitation. And with that, you see like what's needed. And then you probably also, so now a party is a pretty analog piece and there are not a lot of ways around it. But when we talk about digital product, we usually can do way less to have part of the goal filled or even the whole goal filled. So I look often into then what are the critical steps and what are the first critical steps. So maybe you have to concentrate first on the invitation before thinking a lot about a space you have to get because you don't even know how many people are coming.
I love how you start with the end in mind. And maybe what's implicit to it is even who is in mind, right? In this case, it's my friends and family to invite to this party. And then what kind of outcome do we want to have from their perspective? That's a really solid question that I think we forget, whether we're hosting parties or we're building products. And then the customer journey, I think, is something that I see used fairly often from the customer's perspective. If I was Christoph, who was one of my friends that's getting invited, you get the invitation. It's got the necessary information to get you excited and also shows you when to show up on time. And then when you come ring the doorbell, what does it look like from there? You're going to have food available, a party game, like you said, and so forth. And that part, thankfully, a lot of folks are doing. The part that the service blueprint, I think, does is the stuff that's maybe a little bit more behind the scenes or the actions that need to get taken in order to facilitate that experience for the customer journey, right? Like who's writing the invitation? What are the decisions that need to go into writing that? Is there a theme or not? Do you bring anything or not? I think we sometimes, whether it's throwing a party or building a product, we assume that that will get figured out later. And it's a huge miss, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, the obvious one of you end up with surprises closer to testing or launch where you realize that there might be something big or small that was missed. And I think the other one is similar to your be scrappy from earlier. You miss the opportunity of sharing with the folks who are helping you build this or throw this party with the overall picture and the goal and what part they play in it. And I've definitely worked on and helped coach and lead teams that are part of really big organizations, similar to that example you gave before, where the level of engagement and excitement from your team can change dramatically when they understand what piece of the overall puzzle that they're playing, and especially if they know that that puzzle is a very exciting puzzle if we were able to solve it. And I'm curious to know how you think about that or anything you push back on.
No, I think that's a really key insight. So we often like coming from like an experience point, from a product management point, we often don't utilize enough the knowledge of our engineering partners and our design partners. So we sometimes figure out or think we figured out the solution without consulting anybody. And by writing down and getting this picture out of our heads, we can invite others to find a better solution for tricky problems together, and really engaging them in what's right now important, where should we focus, and why are we even doing this. So I see, as you said, I see people overly focused just on the experience and neglecting what's maybe possible at the moment, what's maybe the real next step. And at the same time, I see also teams who just focus on the technical sides of things. They just focus on, okay, we have to build this big system to enable all these features, and we have so many ideas, and get really into this planning, which is then oftentimes really going into this analysis paralysis. So we have more ideas, we have to analyze more, we have to investigate more, and they completely lose, like, okay, why are we even doing this, and what are the key steps for our customers, which we have them to enable for doing this. So, and with visualizing, we can bring the folks together, we can have a major discussion about what's now important.
That's a wealth of information, and you've been in the throes of this, and you developed a method. I think you call it the Mapper method. So tell us a little bit about the method.
Yeah, so the method developed out of the situation I told you before, when I was working with a lot of teams at this education company and was getting lost, and found the first aha moments with presenting visually, working visually with multiple teams. And the method is pretty simple because it doesn't describe like exactly what visual tools you're using or how you visualize. It just guides you through a usual product development cycle. So I encourage people to first map for themselves, to get like a first draft out, and then connect with their team. So to acknowledge the perspectives of everybody and go really into a listening and discussion mode. And then to make it actionable, start to point out assumptions and risks. So you have then your overview, rough overview of things, and you probably have already things where you're not sure if you have enough information. And with this bit, you then plan your next actions and act on it. That can be some validation piece where you just build a landing page or something like that. Can be a little bit of a bigger prototype. Can also in other situations be an A/B test or just in conversation with a customer. And with that, you then evaluate for your insights. So you went out, you did something, and get back some valuable information, and then reflect on it to improve it and go back into your visual piece. So it's guiding you through the usual product development cycle, but it anchors you on the visual piece, and you can then combine and mix and match multiple methods, which I usually do. And I know we talk a lot about this visual stuff, so I also created a small mapper guide. So for the method, a small example, and for every listeners of yours who is interested to see that, please just reach out to me on LinkedIn or via mail, and I'm sending you this piece for free.
We got a lot deeper into service blueprints, and at the same time, I think this method can be applied to various forms of visualization and various tools that have different benefits. I think Wordly Maps is one that I've wrestled with a fair amount, more on the situational awareness and business environment, which is a little bit more external. So what are some other areas that you think this can kind of come into play?
So I use it in also individual product management coaching to really get into the weeds of their business model, go into the weeds of their strategy. So often visualize from different perspectives. So one perspective is the service blueprint, for example. Another perspective might be a KPI tree where you see, okay, how is your indicator, which you can influence as a team, connected to your bigger revenue goals or recurring users or other KPIs which are on a way higher level. And with like this, there are a lot of different methods, and oftentimes it helps to combine these methods to get this multiple perspectives down and find out what your next actions are.
100%. And I think KPIs or maybe even OKRs fall under this potential confusion where teams are at the risk of being locally optimized and losing the plot of why they exist in the first place and how they contribute to the overall goal. And I strongly agree with you that visualizing this initially in terms of planning, but over time, visualizing the analytics dashboards as a tree like that also helps where folks may push back on what's being measured today and maybe doesn't make sense anymore to measure this metric versus another when we consider what the overall goal is and also what the maturity of the product and how far progress we've made where those things change. And I fully agree that using this method and making it clear to folks gives them the ammunition to ideate and be creative within the realm or to also push back and be the agents of change around that. And I'm curious if you've seen this in the field.
Yeah, so you will be surprised how often we start to visualize a business model, how the inputs are driving their business. And then people are starting to share this and how many people disagree. So there is no clear understanding exactly how different KPIs are connected, how they're interacting with each other. And then starting a conversation around this model really can change how you make decisions. Because maybe you're optimizing for the completely wrong thing because you haven't had the full picture.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I love it. And we will make sure to have ways that the audience can get in touch with you so that they can get access to the Mapper method as well. So I feel like I really want to ideally at least encourage and inspire one person out there to try doing a service blueprint and take a chance at visualizing stuff. Similar to yourself, even just for themselves and not necessarily at this stage for sharing with the team, right? So if you will humor me, let's come up with maybe 3 pieces of advice each with respect to some best practices around visualization and specifically service blueprints. And for the audience, I'm going to set a 2-minute timer for Christoph and I and give us a chance to pick our favorite top 3.
It's pretty easy. The first thing is get started. Put something down, visualize, just sort your own thoughts. Oftentimes, this is already a huge game changer. And then really build out the story you want to tell. What are the steps your customer should feel? And then write down what are you knowing already about this. So most of your listeners have already a product. Most people are not working in a green field. So gather the first data and put together your understanding. Is like the first step to just like understand what you're understanding before going out, before trying to use this as a team, because it's all about training. It's like a musical instrument. You can't go out and play an amazing piano concert without having a few reps in.
Mm-hmm. I love those three. I think mine, as I think back, are doing the end-to-end for the customer, especially if you're working on a sub-team or a sub-component of a bigger program. And from the customer's perspective, you are like in the automotive world, if you're working on the financing application, but the customer is in there hitting your OEM.com and all the way through to creating the purchase, when you do your user journey and your service blueprint, think about the entire journey. You may not have access to the entire journey, and I'd say take a stab at it first and see which parts about that guess you feel comfortable and which parts you don't, especially outside. And secondly, I think it's when you get a service blueprint, what it usually instilling is that visualization causes an emotional reaction. Sometimes that can be excitement on behalf of the customer and the team you're working on and your company. Sometimes it can also be fears and concerns, right? Where you identify the bottlenecks of, there's no way we're going to be able to service this many on the output if we're going to have to expect this many on the input. And that goes on a separate list of risks or assumptions, which then become your priority of things to go solve first before you solve the things that you know how to solve and you know are going to work. And I think the third one is super important to have the service blueprint and the customer journey really aligned. Even visually, it's nice to have them in the same verticals so that the folks on the team and yourself can feel really engaged with the experience that the customer's having and the emotions you want to instill on them. And I think this is also an opportunity to instill just little pieces of delight that come in from the broader strategy or the broader brand. Someone told me recently about purchasing a car from Carvana, and when they were on the phone with the Carvana rep, they had to interrupt the phone call because their child needed something. And the rep asked some questions about the kid and so forth and what their name was. And when the car was delivered, there was a little stuffed animal seatbelted, buckled into the back with the seatbelt and everything, with a note to the child, right? And those are little things that required very little software. And nevertheless, everyone involved with the various operations, technical and non-technical, had an opportunity to align themselves back to the overall customer journey. And so there's other opportunities that I think you can really instill upon your team with giving them ideas on how to really meet the mission and delight the customers there.
Yeah. I love your last point because like every team who produces software is not, the goal is not to produce software. The goal is to have some customer experience and enable a customer to solve a problem, to get somewhere, to do something. And oftentimes like heavy software is not the perfect approach. There can be easier approaches. And I think starting to think from a customer perspective and then adding what's really needed can give you a really different perspective how to solve for these problems.
I totally agree. And I mean, from a business perspective, writing no software is the most optimal hypothetical solution, right? If you need no human manual intervention and no software, and you can still get the customer what you're promising them, that's ideal. That seems unlikely. So it's now a balance of how much can you get done with your human team and how much can you get done with the software, and a good interplay between the two. So Christoph, one of the questions that I like to ask all my guests is a little bit more, call it on the personal experience side, where we are experiencing products all the time. As products people, I think we scrutinize things differently than our family and other people might, and we notice things that they find mundane, but we find that really delights us or really irritates us. And I'd love to know, something that you experienced, a product or a service recently that just delighted you, blew your socks off, and this can be at work or at home.
Yeah. So for me, a long-term product I really like use every day, and I think it's like amazing, is Todoist. It's a simple to-do app at first glance, but it's really powerful. And I have two things I especially love about the thing. First thing, it's pretty agnostic how you work with it. You can mold it however your own to-do approaches. And the other thing is that it's really constantly evolving. You see there's a team behind that who is really engaged in like what their customers are doing with it and providing different solutions for enabling them even better.
I love it. And for you, if we were to compare it to maybe the Notes app on an iPhone, what does Todoist do that the Notes app doesn't?
It's just like the Notes app or the native reminder doesn't really connect the calendar and the to-do and gets me really organized in, okay, I have an inbox and I can track from that and then plan out my week and plan out my days. It's a way more powerful tool. And so I think if you professionally need to get organized and you like to work like this, for me, it's working well.
Awesome. And we mentioned that you have the Mapper method available to our listeners. If they get a hold of you, where can folks find you?
So the easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn. Just reach out there. If you want to go deeper into the visualization stuff, I also write a Substack at Mapper Club. So there you can read about different techniques, different approaches, and my thinking. And I'm always happy to hear the personal experiences there. And if people have stories to tell, which inspire me further.
Awesome. We will make sure to have links to all of those in the show notes too. Thank you so much for making the time today and educating us all on the power of visualization and the importance of doing service blueprints to augment your customer journey. Hope you have a good one.
Thank you, Ashok. It was really fun talking with you. Hope to continue this conversation at another point.
I trust you found that episode with Christoph useful. I thought his advice on leaving in the question marks and creating really rough sketches to share with your team to solicit more engagement and higher quality feedback to be super profound and maybe even a little counterintuitive. My main reason until now for sharing rough feedback was to really create a feedback loop that was early and more often. And I didn't think about how it maybe generates higher quality feedback and higher engagement from the team. It also reminded me of something that our guest from June 11, 2024, Deepika Yeragunta said, where she cited a story about how politicians earn trust by asking for favors versus doing favors. And this conflict, as you can imagine, sent me down a rabbit hole trying to figure out why. And I found 3 different psychological phenomena that come into play here. And I think all 3 can be extremely powerful in soliciting perspective and context from your team while also driving engagement and getting them excited about your mission. The first one is the Zeigarnik effect, where people tend to remember incomplete tasks better than completed ones. And this leads to a desire to finish or improve them and often drives engagement with unfinished products or ideas, prompting people to invest more energy in making them better. And that came into play at Christoph's. The second one that may also come into play here is the IKEA effect that suggests that people place a higher value on things that they've had a hand in creating or improving, particularly when that task is incomplete. It's why I think we tend to like our IKEA furniture more than finished furniture, maybe why we liked Betty Crocker cakes better than ones made by chefs, and why that uncle or aunt of yours prominently places that artwork that they created in their house when we don't necessarily see the same value in it than they do. The third is called the Ben Franklin effect, and it refers to where people likely feel more positively towards someone after they're doing them a favor rather than the other way around. And apparently Ben Franklin won over a political opponent by asking him to lend a rare book, and that resulted in that opponent liking Ben Franklin a lot more. So thanks always for listening, folks. Hope you found this useful, and if you did, please help us out by helping other folks find the valuable content by giving us a 5-star rating as well as liking the episode. We will be back on Tuesday with the next episode, and make sure to hit subscribe and like so you're notified about that. We'll see you then. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.